Hey, and welcome, folks. Jake and Cody back with another episode of Demo Day. It's a quick reminder, Demo Day is Cody and I sharing what we've been working on, bringing you to the cutting edge of AI tools, products, AI-powered software development. And today we are going to be jumping into a hobby project of mine, a MCP client built in the vein of Obsidian, but with the goal of it being, Claude Code first, and just to play nice with all the new AI tooling that is coming out. And I think with that, we'll jump right into demo. I'm going to give a quick tour of the app, some of the inspiration behind it, and then show probably like the crown jewel of where the app is at so far, which is being able to run multiple instances of Claude Code together and in a way that allows you to configure them to be unique agents. So here in the app, this is a desktop app. It's, you can see it up here in the corner. This is, oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's not a web app, although we'll touch on that in a little bit. It has a really cool architecture. But when I say inspired by Obsidian, this whole app is set up to be very plug and play. Each of these different plugins on the side are essentially kind of standalone apps that can render their own views. They also expose MCP servers that, as this grows, you'll be able to connect different plugins together using MCP. Got a very non-plugin here, my Nest thermostat, that's just an MCP server exposed. But when you think about like kind of Obsidian, I don't want to go anything too, this is me musing the other day on creating a newsletter business, but just a note-taking app in here, and then got a canvas, able to draw some stuff using TL Draw, got a little bit of a to-do manager across different boards, and this in the same way that Obsidian has that file over app philosophy, this does too. All of the data in this app is just stored as text files locally that you can, pop into and open up yourself. What this unlocks, though, is running Claude Code across each of these different plugins. So here in the Claude Code plugin, you can see that I have two different configurations. Now, if you've used Claude Code locally, you know that you have to open up your terminal, you cd into a directory, you type Claude, and then you have settings that are inherited both from like your overall user scope and then that specific project. There could be MCP servers configured at any of those layers. And if you want to do something custom, you essentially have to create a whole new directory and then set up Claude there, set those settings, and then remember to cd into that directory when you want to use Claude in that way. The neat thing here is in the app, I've set it up such that there are different configurations. I have this little to-do manager. I could probably get rid of test here. It's just a to-do manager. It works. And then a house controller that controls my thermostat. And I can see the different sessions that I've had with each of these Claude Code instances. And they're totally different. So they have different permission settings. If I open up this configuration, I can see that the tools that I've allowed or disallowed for this agent. So in particular, I don't want my to-do manager to delete any files. That's just not something I want it to do. I also have some plugins set up to expose a to-do MCP server. So let's jump in and show a quick demo of that. All right, first up here, we can see that we do pull up a Claude Code terminal instance. This is a full terminal. I can type here, all of the Claude Code commands are available here. And then below, I have an additional text box, which I'll love to layer in more functionality eventually, but it's not there yet. So first up, we can see the MCP servers available by typing in the /MCP command. You can see that we have that to do MCP server. And then I can say, tell me about. And this works just like a Claude Code instance, but it has access to that configuration that we set up before. This in particular, MCP server has the ability to list resources and also see, let's see, it might go the wrong direction here. This is a great snippet for later about MCP design. Oh, it did land on the right one. That's pretty nice. So it's using this read MCP resource. We're following the resource spec from the MCP authors. And then we see that we have this to do about writing a newsletter about local coding agents. It's actually what I was just working on. These dates are wrong. That's a bug. But so we can control the to-dos. And if I open up this work tab, I actually see that these are the two to-dos that I have in progress here. Now, if we go back, if I can find whichever tab had that open, I could now say, do I have any notes related to the local coding agent? And now this is the superpower that I'm looking for out of Claude Code. And in this is I want to be able to kind of use Claude Code and have access to all the things that I need to do to get my work done. So that's managing my to-dos, accessing my written notes, eventually accessing like Linear or Notion, which will also be able to just plug in with another MCP server. So there we have it. Just like that, Claude was able to read through my notes, find the note that I had written about local coding agents, and I have this to do set up. So I could actually just tell Claude now, can you mark that to do as complete? Let that think for a second here. And Claude will ask me permission. And because it's like this full interactive terminal still, I can just click on this and then hit yes, proceed, or give it permission to always run that command. And that permission will persist actually for that agent configuration going forward as well. So now if we go back to the to-dos, we can see that it has gone from here and it is now moved somewhere over here. All right, I'll pause there. That's the quick once over the demo. We'll let Cody jump in here with any questions or commentary.
Yeah, just one comment off the bat here. It's a pretty minor point, but this might be the first time I've seen resources exposed by an MCP
Yeah.
server. Could you say a little bit about that? What was the motivation there? Was it just exploratory? Did it provide some sort of benefit that you've noticed?
Yeah, definitely just exploratory. And that's why I was actually a little surprised that I was doing it because I thought I had commented out. I've not seen any other MCP servers using resources yet. I could see that evolving over time. And I think part of the reason that they don't exist yet is because there isn't like a standard MCP client approach. There's a really great podcast episode with the creators of the MCP spec. And they talked about how they took inspiration from LSPs, the language server, I believe, protocol, where they're solving the classic many-to-many problem of there's many coding IDEs, there's many languages. They have a very similar definition and syntax that they need to share between them, but solving, VS Code or Atom, solving that language, the language definition for all of them would be like very duplicative work. And so LSP was invented as a way to expose language resources into a standardized UI more or less. And that's why like a lot of the syntax highlighting and everything is very similar across IDEs. And that just doesn't exist for MCP yet. So to Tybo and the analogy is MCP took a lot of inspiration from LSPs. LSPs are used in a client that has a fairly standardized approach and standard UI components, and that makes it really powerful. I don't think we have that yet for MCPs. This is kind of my attempt to make it for myself locally, but I just don't think there's those UI slots for resources to like be useful yet. But I think if there were, then they would exist. And to do a real quick demo, so something I'm really interested in being able to do is pulling in the classic like at command type experience that is really, I think, popularized by Cursor, and be able to add in resources. And so the next layer here is I want all of the MCP servers that you have turned on to aggregate up and bubble up to like a UI input where you can quickly tag a specific resource and say, hey, Claude, I'm talking about these 3 resources across different MCP servers. Could you go do work with them? And then Claude would be able to use the get resource command from each of those servers to pull it into context. But those UI affordances just don't exist broadly yet.
Very cool. If you jump back to the actual Claude Code kind of top level view, where you can see all of your different sessions and configurations. So are you just kind of reading out, if you click in like To Do Manager, for example, and you can see all of the sessions that you had going, as well as the settings, is this just reading out information from Claude Code that's just available on the OS, or are you tracking this internally?
Yep, it is. It's just reading it out. Let me actually pull it up for you because it's kind of interesting to look at. And the documentation is currently wrong for this. I let one of the team members know. But if you open this folder, not that one, or that one, this one. If you open the Claude in your whatever root user directory, this is all of the Claude information that Claude Code stores on your device. And these are like the to-do lists. These are plugins, output styles that you can define, and then like projects. And they kind of create this folder structure based on where you started the project from. And so the to-do, MCP plugins, Claude Code agents to do test. This is the to-do agent here. And so these JSON-L files are all the sessions. And you can pop it open and like see the whole, it's going to really make me do it in Cursor. You can pop it open and see like the whole one line, all that for nothing. But you get the lines that were in that conversation then in those files. And so these sessions that we're seeing here, this is really just pulling out the metadata for each of them based on what's in that folder. And then clicking resume is starting the CLI with the ID in that conversation. That's
very cool.
Wonderful.
Does the Claude Code SDK have a way to kind of discover past sessions? This isn't really something I've personally played around with. I've kind of just always accepted that, if I start a new instance, that I am just kind of never going to get back to those old conversations I was having, which is
Yeah.
sometimes what I want, but sometimes I would, maybe I have to reload a window or something in VS Code, for example, and I use the Claude Code extension there pretty frequently. So I kind of just lose access to it then, because at least the extension doesn't seem to have any built-in way to resume those old conversations that I'm aware of. But could you
Yeah.
say a little bit about that? Like that, it seems like you're almost building some really nice quality of life features over Claude Code with this. And I know the MCP client is much larger than just Claude Code, but this visualization feels like it's a missing. And maybe you can just
Yeah.
find those IDs yourself and resume the conversations. But could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do think there would be value in just having like being able to see the sessions like this. I don't know why that resume didn't work, but let's see if that one or maybe I have a bug. So yeah, that popped open and pulled up a new session. I haven't seen if there's a way to resume with the SDK. There might be, but I'd have to go double check. You can resume in Claude itself. So I'm in this to do test folder. That's where this agent is living. If I do Claude, I can do a /resume command,
Oh,
and that'll give me this UI. And I believe this UI is essentially the same thing that I'm showing in
yep.
the overall like MCP client. I think they do the same thing and just like list out the different sessions and then resume with that ID.
Okay. Yeah, that's my fault. I just can't keep up with all the features they seem to be shipping. There's
Yeah.
something new all the time, but still very cool to be able to see it all. And something that I could find value in here as well is being able to just mount arbitrary directories from this Claude Code plugin. So maybe
Yep.
I've got some projects that I would just be able to, maybe I don't want to CD all the way over there to ask a question about a specific project I've been working on. So I can
Yeah,
just
totally.
spin up an instance pretty quickly from here. And maybe there's even some kind of gross cross communication that you can be having between different
Yeah.
conversations, like, hey, I was working on this over here, and be able to ask questions. I don't know if that's another MCP that's just the Claude Code MCP being able to access, Claude Code being able to access different projects, but just seeing it visualized like this all in one place is having me, I'm starting to connect the dots on some nice quality of life improvements, especially for
Yeah.
people like us that are working on a bunch of projects. Maybe there's a concept in a project over here I would love to bring over there to a different one. So yeah, very, very nice to kind of have just a control, kind of a master control
Yeah.
console potentially of all your different Claude Code instances in one place.
Yep. My intention with this right now is to make an app that works for the thinking work I need to do, like writing, drafting emails, like all that stuff. But I think before too long, I'll probably add the last few features that are needed to have it be productive for coding as well. So I could just pull up a couple Claude Code instances for whatever project I'm focused on at the time, toggle between them nicely, track to-dos. I think that could be pretty slick. One more thing I want to call out on, just to show the difference between these two configurations and like what it allows, is I've created an MCP server for controlling my thermostat, and then I've created a specific Claude Code instance that has that control. And so I could say, I can ask it about the temperature or just like controlling this like miscellaneous house stuff. Oh, I haven't re-authenticated today. Hopefully that works. Nice. But now if I were to say like, tell me about my to-dos, it should come up short because it doesn't have access to my to-dos. And so this kind of gets to when you have these configurations set up differently as well, it is able to have specific knowledge about what you want it to do. And it just allows a little easier way to have a Claude Code scope to the specific set of MCP servers, features, permissions that you want it to have.
Have you thought about building in any canned prompts to this interface? So I
Hmm.
could see you wanting to check the temperature pretty regularly. Have you thought about a way to bake in like, just have a play
Yeah.
button next to a prompt that you can run and it goes and does, it almost becomes the workflow at a certain point. This is a
Yeah.
pretty simple example of just checking temperature, but maybe it goes beyond that. Maybe it's like check the temperature, and if it's, a certain degree, do X, and you could start imagining how you could potentially chain different conditionals and then just have that action you could run within the instance.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet. That does you can add the custom / commands to Claude Code, and that is just a markdown file in the appropriate folder. So I think it'd actually be pretty easy to make it easier to add slash commands, and then could expose them
Nice.
obviously here when you do the slash, or expose them from like the interface here too, where maybe there's a quick action button. You click that, it spins up Claude, and then it just immediately executes the first slash command you had selected too. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about how you've gone about embedding this terminal in this view? It's kind of a unique approach. If I were to go and build something like this, I probably would have used the Claude Code SDK and tried to wrap some, essentially reinvent the UI just baked in. But this probably, assuming there weren't any huge technical hurdles to embedding the terminal, I could see this actually just being easier because the Claude Code terminal UI is pretty good. They've done a good job building it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make a note to add custom slash commands. Let Claude add that for me. Yeah, so here in the terminal UI, talk through the architecture quick. And this is the reason. This type of like interactivity is why I didn't want to wrap the UI, because like at some level then we have to figure out how to recreate this. And I love Claude Code right now, but there's Cursor CLI, there's Open Code, there's Codex, and as they all come into fruition and support MCP servers, I want to be able to drop them in. I figured having just the core terminal UI be available would be the best way to support all the different agents. And if it makes sense to add like a layer of integration on top, then go direct to the SDK. So that's kind of the rationale behind thinking of it. I just didn't want to have to recreate it a bunch of different times. And then the architecture itself is quite fun and gets to the overall architecture of the app. So the UI is just Xterm, which is like a it's a terminal visual that runs in the client. It doesn't actually interact with like the terminal. It's just a way to like show terminal elements. And then if you were building this on a not Mac app, you would have your backend create a pseudo terminal. And then as data comes in and out of that, that's what you push back to Xterm here in the UI. Overall, I've actually followed a very similar approach to this. This is a Mac app, but it's kind of Electron-esque. It's not Electron, but it's a very similar approach where all of the UI that you're seeing here is actually React, and it's all built in Bun. So there is a Mac app shell around a application written fully in Bun, and that Bun sidecar, as it's called, has access to all of the like system controls, so it can create a terminal instance using Bun PuTTY, Bun PTY, and then can also serve the front end components. So the whole UI here in Swift is just a single web view, and the page that gets loaded is just the Bun server serving a React view. And yeah, then the terminal communication is an Xterm client with that terminal instance actually running as a sub process in the server.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, well, feel free to get your next thoughts together, but I want to show quickly what running it in dev mode looks like, because I think this is the coolest part. So I just I seeded into the Bun sidecar here, and now here in my regular Chrome browser, I actually have the entire app. And so the development process, I develop it entirely as if it was a web app, and then the final build step ports it into the Mac OS kind of container then. And there are a few hiccups there, like Tailwind just doesn't like quite work the same. And there's another step in the build process to make sure all of the Tailwind classes compile correctly. But this neat wrapper allows it to be built as if it was a web app and then still have the full desktop app here available afterwards.
That's really cool. So you could, in theory, ship this as kind of a web application then, and just have your backend server. I imagine there's some containerization issues potentially there if you were to sell this as like a product to many people, right? Because of the essentially just interacting with the file system through that Bun server. So
Yep.
maybe everyone would need their own kind of VM or container that their server actually runs in. But that feels really cool too, because I always find myself wanting to have access to Claude Code or something that just has a little bit more of like a deeper contextual understanding of the things that I'm working on compared to Claude while I'm on the go. Something that like I run a lot, and as I'm on these like long runs, I'm constantly just thinking about stuff that I would like to do or would want to do.
Yeah.
And usually my workflow is like open up Super Whisper and dictate something while I'm running, and then
Yep.
it kind of just lives in there until I have a chance to do something with it. And maybe sometimes they'll like feed it into a GitHub issue and assign it to Copilot and get it started working on stuff. But it's all kind of it's kind of a fragmented experience that isn't really easy to just pick up midstream, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
it's just, with Super Whisper, you dictate and then it's kind of over. It gives you either the dictated notes or potentially just like a summary if you decide to have it do that output. And so I've always wanted, like, I really wish I could have access to that Cloud Code instance running on my computer right now so that I
Yeah.
could iterate on this idea really quickly for a couple of minutes. And,
Hmm.
especially in this case, like persist it somewhere into a to-do without having to deal with a whole bunch of different apps that frankly aren't just aren't very good on the go.
Yeah. Like zooming out, like Claude Code being able to run in GitHub Actions is so cool, and you can do so much with that. But creating an issue on the GitHub mobile app is so bad. like it's like, oh, I downloaded it. It's like I don't need any of these like fancy vibe coding apps. I'll just use the GitHub app. Like I can use Claude Code from there. But if you create like it's so many button clicks to get to a repository and then creating an
Yep.
issue. And if you have like a template that has instructions for Claude, then it muddles the whole thing. So I feel like that's like the V0 way to do that. I think the next iteration it'd be great is if we could make a client that can interact just straight to GitHub in like a very streamlined way to
Yep.
trigger some of those actions.
Which feels like it would be possible with what you've set up here. For example, just open the app, go to the GitHub tab or whatever, or just the Claude Code project that has the GitHub MCP, and then just dictate straight into that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to have at like be a possibility. Part of the reason that I stuck to like the Obsidian philosophy of file over app is like if you own all the data and if your data is text files, then Claude Code can just work with that like naturally. And so like all the notes are just markdown files. And so this is like my local storage for the MCP client. And I think the next layer of this then is just make this be a GitHub repository, and add a
Mm,
little bit of additional support for GitHub Actions and like probably, wrap that in some nice UI. And then, adding a to do would be as easy as dictating that message to the client. It'll spin up Claude Code and GitHub Action. It has all the context it needs. It can find the to dos, it can manipulate them, and then, mark something as done or add to it.
yeah. Yeah, I wonder too if you could just set this up with like I'll say blob storage because I'm working on an Azure-based project right
Yeah.
now. But that type of cloud storage, which is literally just a file system hosted on some remote server,
Yeah.
and maybe that could work even better because the GitHub side of things works well for incremental changes, and if the client has knowledge of how to like persist things to it and continually pull. But if the backend truly is just kind of this living file system where as you perform reads and writes, particularly writes, then that just becomes exposed to the same client potentially that you could be running on your iPhone, for example. And it still kind of
Yeah.
follows the philosophy of Obsidian, in my opinion, because you're not using any external services aside from the storage in that case. So you're not dealing with a backend server and deploying components. It really is just, authorize your client to write to this blob storage and do that for the client on your phone and the one on your computer, and all of a sudden you've got this shared context.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, Railway is coming out with an S3 storage option, which
Oh,
we're big Railway fans here at First Loop. And we use that for, deploying essentially anything we could put in a Docker container we put on Railway. But with they have S3 storage compatible, like I wonder if that would work. You probably could do all this as a volume on a Railway already, but the S3 storage might make it super nice then. So I wonder what it would look like if you had
yeah.
like a backend server that's running and had that connect to the S3 storage and then use like Tailscale so you could just connect to it directly. Like
Yeah.
it's just exposed by this
That's
Tailscale and you can run Claude Code instances remotely on it.
Yeah, that's what's so fun about these personal projects is that you don't have to build it to be resilient for millions of people.
Yeah.
Like connecting over a VPN is completely acceptable, in my opinion, to access that storage.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other methods to this as well. I don't know them all, but like I just think of maybe a more localized version of this is just having your own personal server in your home that
Yep.
is, mounted to the file system on your various devices. And so you can see that starting to extend to, well, just host that elsewhere. And now you've got a VPN in the cloud that you can connect to and access it that way, no matter where you are. Interesting stuff. I don't want to I don't want to go too deep on this. I would love to talk a bit more about just how this whole app is architected. Something I'm particularly interested in is, what does it look like for you to define a new plugin here? It seemed like you pulled in
Yep.
Claude Code pretty quickly as well as TL Draw pretty quickly. And so I'm
Yeah.
just kind of curious about that. It seems like this is just a nice way for you to be able to quickly experiment with new tools. So would love to hear more about the plugin system.
Yep. Yeah. And that's exactly the intention. Here at First Loop, we like create a lot of content. We create a lot of experimental stuff. And so wanted a way to pull some of that together. And I realized that the approach I was taking for all the experimental stuff was kind of following the same thing of using bun init, like their command for creating a new bun project, and then just serving the React components from that. So I did that probably 3 or 4 different times. Like, oh, like there's a common architecture here. With a little bit of thinking, this could be pretty nice. And so we'll walk through a little bit of code. This is definitely not the final version of what this plugin will look like, or the plugin structure, but it's pretty neat. So yeah, super simple, and it's like 10 different files. I should have a diagram for this. At its core, there's like an index file for a plugin, and then we can serve views from that, and let me zoom in a little bit too. Let me close some of these. We can define some schemas, and we can just define some functions that can be called from the client side. So I'm going to start kind of bottom to top here, but this is the whole schema definition for the plugin. Like give it an ID, name, icon, the different views that are available. So that way just the front end knows how to render them. MCP servers. This one is not wired in right now because I'm just having it running independently. Function stubs, and I'll talk about why those are stubs instead of the full functions in a minute. And then some commands. I think this is maybe potentially off a little bit right now, but kind of the whole idea is that we have the core part of the plugin that can be kind of defined schematically. And then there's stuff that is going to be only browser side and stuff that's only going to be server side. Like the views will only get rendered on the front end. And that's kind of important because if you try to import like Xterm in a server side component, then you'll get an error. And so, some stuff needs to be browser only. Although I was able to figure that out, but just by having it lazy loaded. And then the function stubs here are just definition of the functions, just inputs, outputs. And so that way on a view, we can, let's see here, view for plugins. Like if we want to use any of those functions, we just create an API using those function stubs and a hook. And then we can get any to do just by calling that function. And what this is really doing is it's just calling a specific function that's loaded on the server side too. So the front end gets all of the definitions of the functions and what can be done, and then they all get executed server side. And that's what gives us access to reading and writing from the file system and also creating those terminal instances. Yeah, that pretty much covers like the whole like parts that are interesting about the plugin architecture is like just a standard index file, and then you can expose views. Those views have can use functions that are defined that are run on the server side, and it's all follows kind of like a consistent format where each view gets loaded in the same way. Like this kind of meta view component just loads a particular view and passes in specific instance props and like an ID of the tab. So like a view knows where it is.
Okay.
But given that like want to just experiment through so many different tools and kind of iterations of things, this kind of standardizes all of the scaffolding around it, and you can just like plug and play.
Yeah, that's nice. This does feel very Electron-esque. I will say it feels like there's less boilerplate involved in what you've set up here compared to what it seems like is required for an Electron app, which is really nice. And I like just the plugin system in general feels really, really clean. And that it seems like if you want to pull something in, it truly is just plug and play, that you just start in that index file, you define the
Yeah.
interface, and it's kind of off to the races. So could you show us too, like where the server side function definitions? I'm kind of curious just to know a little bit more about how that transport kind of works.
Yeah. So the baseline here is exposing a collection of plugins. Like if this were to ever be open source and more people are using it, this would have to be controlled through the UI somehow. So some sort of base registry, and this just exposes like all of the information that's safe to be on, client and server. And then a specific server registry that just exposes a version of the plugins that have the full functions on them then. So like this to-do plugins with functions is exposed in this functions file within to-dos. So these are the individual like full function definitions. And then we take the functions that are the functions from those stubs, and we essentially just give them the actual callback that's going to be called when that function is used. And then re-expose that. And then in the server, we have an endpoint. It's called plugin registry. It's not named super well. Let me zoom back in. But the way this works then is we get the server version of that plugin. We pull the functions off of it. We get that function definition, and then we execute it that way. And so
Okay.
it's kind of follows like the RPC architecture, where it's calling a function on the server, but the front end knows what values it needs to run, and it knows the back end, it knows the output, and then all of the logic is just handled on the server side.
Very cool. Sweet. So I guess kind of just zooming out a little bit, I'm kind of curious, you said you're going to use this as your think engine in a way. What are you kind of looking to next in terms of big things that you'd like to bring to the project?
Yep. The probably the next thing is besides the perpetual cleanup is kind of looking at the other places where I'm spending administrative time. So kind of my job is either there's like three buckets. It's coding it, generally on client work, sometimes side projects, creating content around either side projects or stuff that we're working on at First Loop, and then administrative stuff, which is like sending invoices to clients or just dealing with admin in general. And this project is not to improve the coding part. There's other things that are better specialized for that. But the content creation and then the administrative tasks are things that I want to target with this. And I've done some prototyping just using Claude Code of things that could be faster in the MCP client. One example is, we send an invoice to a client and we want to give them a nice explanation of how hours are spent on each day. And we can pull that information from linear issues from GitHub commits, and then also our time tracking software. And I pull all that information in, make sure it all looks good, and then kind of like synthesize it into a way that it's like good for a client to skim, but they feel like they know what happened and that it was meaningful. And that work is something I actually do in Claude Code, and I had Claude write a script to generate a PDF from that. So that's now a task that I do every 2 weeks when it's invoicing time. It takes me an hour or two, depending on how complex the last couple of weeks were. But that's something that I can do in Claude Code. And now I want it to be able to do in this. Just make the process repeatable. I'm going to give that Claude Code instance access to all of the MCP servers it needs, along with custom instructions on how to do that process. And then probably that custom slash command like you're talking about earlier. And I think I'm going to be able to get the time spent on that to be significantly lower.
Very cool. So it sounds like a lot of it's going to be just figuring out how to really dial in on the Claude Code tab then here is just creating those more scoped projects and
Yep.
like you said, the slash commands. And because I can also envision that just being a button somewhere that you run. Maybe you have to specify the specific repos if you wanted to analyze commits or, with like the time tracking, whatever.
Yep.
You'd probably want to parameterize the specific client and client project we're working on there. But it feels like that should just be a button, click run and let it kind of go. And just,
Yeah.
have Claude Code churning in the background on it, and then you get whatever the result is. And maybe for some of that, I could even see the Claude Code SDK potentially being a
Yep.
better option there as well. So maybe there's an opportunity there too of, rather than spinning up a terminal, we're really just creating a more generic mechanism around the Claude Code SDK and being able to pass in system prompts and stuff and having that all just be like a runnable workflow almost built in here. rather
Yeah.
than the GitHub action strategy that we've used for several other workflows at this point.
Yeah, I can see that being nice. I guess it's not fair. I haven't spent enough time using the other CLIs. I've used Codex probably the second most, and then I've used the Cursor CLI just a little bit. But I like Claude Code is just so good. I wanted to serve the terminals so that way that abstraction was in place and I could try out other like CLI or like Unix compatible coding agents. But like honestly, maybe just go all in on Claude Code. Like that'd be fine too.
Yeah, I could see you just building I feel like you could build a pretty thin wrapper around I highly doubt Cloud Code SDK will be the only kind of SDK fork that we get out of tools like this. I'm pretty sure there is an agents SDK from OpenAI as well, right? That kind of
Yeah,
follows the same. So I could see there just being kind of either we build a light wrapper to just be able to specify those system prompts and MCP servers and then just write adapters, or maybe I would love to see the AI SDK people
hmm,
push an AI agents SDK that
yeah.
wraps all of these agent SDKs for us so that we could just plug and play them as well.
Yeah, I tweeted at them the other day. I was like, is anyone working on this? Can you let us know so we don't have to worry about it?
Did you get
It's
a
going to come out
reply?
in like 6 months, surely, and it's going to be fantastic. And I just don't want to spend the time on it between now and then.
Right. Yeah. And it still feels like we're not quite at a point where you can truly just let these agents go off and work in fully independently. I'm sure you'd still, in the case of generating the invoices for clients, I'm sure you'd still want some oversight and be able to steer that a little bit. And you can still save a lot of time, even if you're kind of working
Yeah,
one on one with it, but you could guarantee the quality and make sure that it's not just lying. 'Cause,
yeah,
I know that depends on how busy I am and whether I'm keeping Notion and the time tracking stuff fully up to date and being specific there, but I could see Claude maybe inventing some tasks that we worked on just to fill the emptiness.
yeah. You're much better at it than I am, but I have a horrible tendency. Every commit message is just changes, or next, next, and then I asked Claude Code to go summarize the work that I did. It's like, what do you mean? You just said changes 100 times in a row. So I got to break that habit too because I'm giving Claude bad data. But
Yeah, that is, especially once repos are set up for pull requests, I think it becomes a bit easier to make sure that we're following best practices there. And yeah, the current project I'm
yeah,
working on, I can't say I've just been moving so fast that I didn't want to be bogged down by pull requests.
yep,
So I've definitely been pretty sloppy with my commit messages. Some of the commits have been rather large, so I don't think it would do a very good job of, even if it did pull the full diff, if it's getting 20,000
Jesus, yeah,
lines of code changed over the last week, it's probably going to struggle to understand what actually happened.
yeah.
But yeah, very cool stuff here. Thanks for walking us through this. Did you have any other parting remarks before we head out?
No, I think that's it. I mean, this has been a ton of fun to work on. I now use it every day. Like it's my primary task manager and write notes and stuff in there. So it's been a ton of fun. Somebody did see a demo I posted on it and DM me asking if it was going to be open source. And like it'll surely be open source at some point right now, or some point. But right now it's just a little bit too messy. So if folks are watching this and they want to try it out, like would love to talk to a couple people on the earlier side and share it. It'll come down the pipeline eventually, but not for a little bit yet.
Yeah, I would love to see this open sourced, and I'm sure other people would as well. This is something that I've been meaning to work on. Maybe I'll let you polish out some of the rough edges, but I would definitely love to pull this into my own workflows, even if just for the Claude Code experience. That
Yeah,
definitely is super appealing to me. Yeah, thanks for walking us through this project. We're excited to see where it goes in the coming weeks and months here. And folks, stay tuned. We'll let you know. We'll be very noisy when and if this gets open
yeah.
source. But yeah, thanks for joining us for this episode, and we'll see you all next week.